In 1984, a horrific case occurred in Florida when a woman named Karen Gregory was found dead in her home in the Hialeah area. Her body was discovered with multiple injuries, and a bloody footprint was left at the scene, becoming the first crucial clue in the investigation. The police immediately began searching for the perpetrator, and after a short period of time, they uncovered some suspicious evidence. As the investigation deepened, strange and terrifying details began to surface, making the case more complex than ever. After years of persistent pursuit of the truth, the police finally uncovered the mystery, but the outcome of the story was completely unexpected for everyone involved. Karen Gregory was born in 1948 in Albany, New York, and was the eldest of 4 siblings. From a young age, she showed a particular interest in sports and the arts. After graduating from Nazareth College in Rochester, Karen worked as an elementary school art teacher and later as a graphic designer. In 1983, at the age of 35, she decided to move to Florida. There, she met David McKee, a man she quickly fell for. They soon fell deeply in love and decided to move in together in David's home in Hialeah. On May 22nd of that year, Karen completed the move from her old apartment to David's house. She told her neighbors that she was a bit nervous because David had to travel for work to another state, leaving her alone in the new house for a week. After leaving her apartment, Karen visited a friend's house where they had a good time together. She confided to her friend that she was very happy being with David and was excited about their upcoming life together. The conversation lasted until around midnight, after which Karen returned to David's house. The next day, David repeatedly called home, but no one answered. He thought that perhaps Karen had stayed at her old apartment, so he called the neighbors to ask, but the woman said she hadn't seen Karen since the day before. Worried, David continued to reach out to Karen's friends and her sister, but no one knew where she was. By May 24th, David called home again early in the morning, hoping to catch Karen before she left for work, but the phone still went unanswered. He called Karen's boss and discovered that she hadn't shown up for work. David's worry reached its peak, and he began to suspect that something might have happened to Karen. He contacted local hospitals and the police to inquire if anyone resembling Karen had been admitted, but there were no results. Finally, he called his neighbor Amy to ask if Karen's car was parked outside. Amy looked outside and confirmed that the car was still there, which only heightened David's anxiety. He asked Amy to go knock on the door and check. Amy nervously followed the instructions over the phone, knocking on the side door, but there was no response. She walked around the house and noticed an open window. After calling out Karen's name several times with no answer, Amy reached her hand through the window, pulled back the curtain, and was shocked by what she saw. Through the bedroom window, she saw a bloody female body lying on the hallway floor. Though she couldn't clearly see the face as it was blocked by a wall, Amy was almost certain it was Karen. In a panic, she ran back to her house, where David was still waiting on the phone. He urgently told her that something terrible had happened, then hung up to call 911. Emergency medical personnel quickly arrived at the scene, but could only confirm that Karen had passed away. The police began investigating the crime scene, and even the most experienced officers were stunned. Based on the amount of blood in the house, they concluded that Karen had fought the perpetrator fiercely until the very end. Bloodstains led from the hallway to the front door, where the glass had been shattered, and the police found several strands of hair resembling Karen's caught in the broken glass. They speculated that she had nearly escaped, but was pulled back by the attacker and assaulted in the bathroom. There, investigators discovered the first clue, a bloody footprint on the floor. After examining Karen's feet and finding no blood, they determined that the footprint definitely belonged to the perpetrator. However, the strange part was that no one understood why the attacker would be barefoot in the bathroom. Medical examiners performed the autopsy and concluded that Karen had been stabbed about 20 times and suffered severe violence. They also collected some biological material from the perpetrator on the victim's body. Unfortunately, in 1984, DNA analysis technology had not yet been implemented, so this clue could not immediately help the police identify the killer. Additionally, some bloody fingerprints on Karen's body were too smudged to be useful. According to experts, Karen had been dead for about 30 hours before being discovered, meaning she was murdered the night after returning from her friend's house. Another notable detail was that Karen was wearing a shirt over a lace bra, clearly left by the attacker after committing the assault. After the police finished processing the crime scene and collecting all possible evidence, They allowed Karen's friends to begin cleaning the house. These women didn't want David to witness the horrific scene. When David returned, everyone who knew Karen understood how deeply he loved her and tried to ease his pain. Since David's meeting was on the other side of the country, it took him quite some time to return home. Meanwhile, the police began questioning the neighbors. The area was considered quite prestigious and safe, with a low crime rate, and many residents knew each other, even setting up a neighborhood watch system. However, in this case, the system seemed to have failed. Investigators found that around 1:15 a.m. on May 23rd, 16 residents in the area heard a woman's piercing scream, but none of them called the police. They assumed the scream stopped quickly and didn't think anyone was in danger. Even the head of the neighborhood watch group, who lived directly across from the victim's house, didn't think it was necessary to call the police. He was fixing a motorcycle and listening to the radio when he heard a muffled scream. He stepped out of the garage, took a walk around the block, saw nothing unusual, and then returned home. A neighbor living across from David's house shared an interesting observation. On the morning of May 23rd, he saw the front door of David's house open, and he also heard the scream from the night before, but he didn't connect the two events. However, when the police arrived after the 911 call, the door was locked. With Karen's body having been in the house for about 30 hours, the killer might have returned to cover their tracks, including locking the door. Notably, there was no sign of forced entry on any doors. The police speculated that the perpetrator might have climbed through the back window, but there was no sign of entry there either. It was possible that Karen had left the window open all night, or she might have known the killer and let them in herself. The head of the neighborhood watch also recalled another detail. The night after Karen was murdered, a strange man drove to her house, knocked a few times, looked around, and then left. But a few minutes later, he returned, leaving a piece of paper on Karen's car windshield before driving away. The police examined the paper and found it had Karen and David's names written on it. The investigators immediately took note of the phrase, "no sign of life," on the paper, which was an odd choice of words because Karen had been dead for nearly a day when this man came by. The paper was signed by Peter, and after an investigation, the police discovered that he wasn't a stranger. Peter had learned of Karen's death from an old neighbor of hers and had come to check on her house. He fully cooperated, providing fingerprints and footprints, and explained that a few days earlier, Karen had invited him and David to dinner. When asked about the phrase, "I have what you want," on the paper, Peter claimed he had borrowed a roll of tape from them and intended to return it. However, what was odd was that Peter didn't notice the broken glass scattered on the walkway or the shattered windows. During the conversation, one of the investigators noticed a large cut on Peter's hand. When asked about it, he covered the wound and claimed it was from playing with a dog or fixing a motorcycle. Although everything seemed very suspicious, Peter stated that on the night of the murder, he had been home sleeping, and neighbors confirmed this. However, the police didn't quickly rule him out as a suspect, as such statements could easily be fabricated. The investigators then turned their attention to David, Karen's boyfriend. According to him, he had been in Rhode Island 2,000 miles away, sleeping in his hotel room that night. However, at the crime scene, the police found a local Rhode Island newspaper dated May 23rd, the day Karen was murdered. This led them to suspect that David might have flown to Florida, killed his girlfriend, and then returned before his next meeting. They calculated the time it would take to travel from the airport to the house and found it plausible. Moreover, no one could confirm David's alibi, as he claimed to have slept alone in the hotel. The head of the neighborhood watch also mentioned that Karen and David frequently argued when she moved in with him, despite David's claims that their relationship was good. When questioned about the newspaper, David said he had bought it at a store near his home to check the weather forecast for his trip. The police verified with the store, and the cashier remembered David buying the paper on May 21st. According to the cashier, the paper had been printed a few days earlier, which was normal in the printing industry. Therefore, the suspicion about David gradually faded. The police continued to investigate whether anything had been stolen from Karen's house. David noticed that a white lace bra, which Karen had bought a few months earlier, was missing, very similar to the one the attacker had left on her. This led them to think that the attacker might have taken it as a trophy. Another clue surfaced. A hand-drawn picture signed by Stephen Fischler was found in the house, with a red stain believed to be blood. Stephen worked at the same company as Karen, and when the police questioned his coworkers, they found that he was an odd person who often harassed women, sharing disturbing images and poetry. Many female colleagues, including Karen, felt uncomfortable with his behavior, but management had not taken it seriously. When interrogated, Stephen denied giving Karen the drawing and claimed not to know her, even suggesting a polygraph test. During the polygraph examination, Stephen unexpectedly admitted to killing Karen, but then retracted his statement. Strangely, the polygraph did not detect any lies in either instance. However, the police could not rely on these results, as polygraphs are not foolproof. Upon further examination, the red stain on the drawing turned out to be ketchup, not blood, which diminished suspicion about Stephen. Despite several suspects, the police still lacked enough evidence to charge anyone. The case went cold for several months until December, when a resident named Mary inadvertently told a police officer that she had heard the scream that night, even though she lived 2 blocks away from Karen's house. This suggested the scream was very loud, which contradicted the statement of George Lewis, the head of the neighborhood watch who lived across from Karen's house, who had said the scream was faint. George, 22, a firefighter, was considered a reliable person by the neighbors. However, the police began to doubt him after hearing Mary's account. They invited George to the station, but he didn't show up, even though he had frequently visited friends there. It wasn't until January 1985 that they were able to speak with him. George insisted the scream wasn't loud, possibly drowned out by the sound of his radio. When asked further, he retold the same story. He heard the scream, went outside to check, but saw nothing. However, this time he said he only stood at the curb looking around, which was different from his previous account, where he had said he walked around the block. The police suggested a polygraph test, which he failed. George then admitted to having seen a tall man with red hair near Karen's house that night, but had not reported it earlier because he was afraid of retaliation. The police were skeptical of this testimony, as it was dark and the distance was far, making it hard to clearly see the man's hair color. They recreated the scene, and George was unable to describe the person who was about 30 meters away, which only increased their suspicions. The police interviewed more residents and discovered that a few women had seen a man peeking through the windows at night. One woman described the man as resembling George, although she wasn't sure because it was dark. George admitted that sometimes he would look through his neighbor's windows, but he said it was to ensure safety in his role as neighborhood watch captain. By March 1985, George took a second polygraph test and changed his story. He not only saw the man, but also spoke with him and was threatened with death. The polygraph again detected deception. When directly asked, "Did you kill Karen?" George denied it, but the results still indicated that he wasn't being truthful. George's wife stated that she had been awakened by the scream that night, went to the garage to look for him, but couldn't find him, and he only returned home after 30 minutes. The police also interviewed George's ex-wife, who revealed that he had been violent toward her, often hitting and choking her. George's friends also shared that he had liked Karen for a long time, and had once tried to get her to attend wild parties. A young girl living nearby testified that George had given her a white lace bra for her 17th birthday, which was very similar to the one that had gone missing from Karen. David confirmed it was Karen's bra. The police took George's footprints and sent them to the FBI for comparison with the ones found at the crime scene, and the results matched perfectly. In March 1986, George was reinterrogated. He initially denied involvement, but when faced with the evidence, he told a new story. He had seen the red-haired man run into Karen's house, found her lying in a pool of blood with a cut on her neck, and then panicked and fled. The police didn't believe him, as the detail about the cut on her neck had never been released, and only the killer would know about it. With the evidence mounting, George was arrested on March 15, 1986, nearly 2 years after the crime. He faced the possibility of the death penalty, but his friends and co-workers from the fire department didn't believe he was the killer and raised money for his bail. George was released on bail at the end of 1986 and lived at home for 6 more months before his trial on June 4, 1987. His lawyer maintained that he was innocent, but George presented a new story. He saw a stranger, ran into the house, found Karen's body, ran to the bathroom to vomit, which explained the bloody footprints. However, there was no blood trail from the body to the bathroom, which contradicted his testimony. The prosecutor argued that George had secretly been in love with Karen and had attacked her while David was away. After 2 weeks of trial, George was convicted. But a month later, the judge unexpectedly ordered a retrial after the defense argued that the police had mishandled the evidence. However, by 1989, this decision was overturned, and George was sentenced to life in prison due to his lack of a prior criminal record. He died in prison in 2014 at the age of 52, still maintaining his innocence. Throughout this case, one thought-provoking question remains. 16 neighbors heard Karen scream, yet none of them called the police. With the police station nearby, if the scream had been reported earlier, Karen might have been saved. This raises the issue of community responsibility in emergency situations.